I know it's very loud out there. Can you hear me okay in the back? Things. I'm an intellectual property attorney, so we deal with all aspects of intellectual property, and we represent some of the biggest and some of the newest food companies in Ireland and globally. We also represent a lot of the pharmaceutical industry here in Ireland and globally. And what we've seen is that there's been a convergence between these industries. Definitely food and beverage industry is becoming more innovative. You can see yourself, there's a whole research and innovation stream here today. It's certainly moving towards the pharmaceutical industry, and research and innovation has been seen as a central pillar to the food and beverage industry. And what we're seeing with a lot of food and beverage clients is that their products are moving into pharmaceutical areas and are applicable in pharmaceutical areas. So it's certainly a merging of the different areas. So when we look at intellectual property, we look at all these different market backgrounds and see changes in the markets. But we can see that the intellectual property is always being managed in the same way, and that's quite poorly. I don't know if anyone has any experience with intellectual property in the industry you're in. A little bit. Does anyone have a good experience with intellectual property? A little bit. Sometimes you ask that question, it's a bit like you ask someone if they've had a foreign delicacy and they're like, yeah, I tried it was okay. I might give it another go sometime. When we're talking about intellectual property, we're talking about all aspects of it, but in food and beverage industry and pharmaceutical industry, particularly, I think a lot of people are aware of patents, trademarks, designs and copyright as being the central pillars of intellectual property. But in food and beverage industry, remember that there's a lot of other unregistered rights that you can have under these know-how, trade secrets, unregistered design rights that are also going to help you in your business, and that are definitely a form of intellectual property that you need to know how to manage and why. So we get a lot of clients asking us, how do we manage our intellectual property, what should we do with it? We also get a lot of people coming with some misconceptions of intellectual property. There's some old wives' tales that are not so true. There's a lot of debunking of some misconceptions that have to be done. So hopefully we'll go through some of that today, and we can see if there are things out there that you believe about intellectual property. If you have any questions, stop me and we can talk about it. But a lot of these questions are the questions we get every day from people about intellectual property. A lot of people say that there's no intellectual property in their business. They just run that type of business. It's either sort of a consumer foods thing, it's very basic. We don't have a lot of intellectual property. Does anyone feel that is a true statement? Yeah, it's actually quite a false statement. You'll always have intellectual property in your business. A lot of people will look at a slide like this and say, but that's Coca-Cola, of course they have intellectual property. They're a huge multinational conglomerate. But you got to remember, even for the type of products that you might, or the services that you might provide, there's all types of intellectual property. So in a product like Coca-Cola, you might have a trademark that's going to protect the brand that it's under. You'll also have certain unregistered trademark rights and goodwill that will be associated with your brand. So when you're building a brand, remember there are ways to protect it through trademarks. Design is also a huge area of intellectual property that's growing very significantly in the food and beverage market. Design is going to protect the outward look of something, and Coca-Cola actually have a design on their vending machines, on how they look. So they have unique vending machines compared to other people, and they can stop other people from copying their vending machine look. So remember, when you're producing products, product packaging, the products themselves, all sorts of ancillary things, marketing materials that go with your product may be design protectable. Coca-Cola obviously are quite an innovative company, and they have patents and patent applications out on, this is actually stevia. It's the steviol glycoside, so that's the plant extract that you get in Coke Life, which is the low sugar plant extract. So they have patent applications out on parts of that and different forms of that. So patents are going to protect all the technological parts, how your inventions work and how your products work and what's underlying the technology. You've got to remember copyright as well is also something that's quite overlooked, and you'll have protection and copyright in fixed materials that you do. So any of your product booklets, some of your websites, part of your packaging is all protectable by copyright as well. So what you've got to remember is no matter what type of business you have, there'll always be a form of intellectual property, and you just need to understand that it is protectable and to what extent you should protect it. So remember to always audit your company, particularly in general, but also audit the products within your business or the services that you provide to see if there is intellectual property that could be captured and can be used to further your commercial gain. Registration of intellectual property. So there's two forms of intellectual property, registered and unregistered rights. And a question we always get asked, or a statement we always get told, is that registration of intellectual property is unnecessary. Would you consider that to be true or false? Or does anyone even know what the difference is? Not really. That's okay. So if you register your intellectual property, it's an exclusive right, and you have an exclusive right and you don't have to prove any form of copying. An unregistered right is a right in that subject matter, but you're going to have to prove that somebody copied you to be able to enforce your right. Okay? So registration of intellectual property gives you an exclusive right. You don't have to prove copying. If you don't register it, you're relying on a right where you're going to have to prove that somebody has copied you if they think they have. So if you register your intellectual property, you're going to have to avoid the lengthy thing of having to prove. It's also quite difficult. We get a lot of cases of unregistered rights to try and prove it. It's quite difficult to prove copying through unregistered rights. However, in this industry, you're looking at particularly food and drink. Registered rights aren't always the most applicable form of protection for people in the food and beverage industry, particularly for fast-moving consumer goods and for fad-type products. Unregistered rights are probably a better way to go. You're not going to go to the time and the expense of registering something to have a long-term protection on it that you might not use because your product might only come in the market and turn over again in 3 to 5 years or less. So when you're assessing your business, when you're assessing your products, think about the type of product it is and the type of product that you want for it. If you want long-term protection, like into the 10s, 20s, indefinite protection of years, you need to start thinking about registering rights. If it's a fast-moving consumer goods, something like that, or a fast-moving service that will turn over and change, you might want to think about unregistered rights, but you've got to know the difference and you've got to know what you can and can't do. So in this industry, trade secrets are actually a very, very big way of doing it, of protecting your intellectual property. What you've got to remember is a trade secret can only be protected as long as it remains a secret. So you need to put procedures in place within your business to ensure that there's confidentiality maintained in whatever you do. So this could be as small as the recipe for some sort of food product. It could be the method of manufacturing a food product. It could be a sales or service method that you provide. You need to put protection in place. You need to make sure that employees, anyone outside the company, are all bound by confidentiality agreements if you're talking to them. You need to limit where information goes and how it goes there, password protecting things. KFC rely on the Colonel Secret recipe as a trade secret, so it's not registered in any way, it's a trade secret. That recipe is held in a safe in Louisville in Kentucky. There's only a limited number of people that have access to the safe. Even at that, when they get manufacturers to manufacture the coating for the chicken, it's made in 2 separate batches. So one manufacturer makes one half of the recipe, one manufacturer makes the other half of the recipe, and nobody ever really gets to see the whole recipe together. So this is the kind of things you need, not to that extent all the time, but these are the kind of things you need to think about. If you're going to use a trade secret, this is the kind of thing you have to think about to maintain confidentiality. Ensure you use legal contracts if you can, non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, to try and maintain secrets and know-how. Another thing that we often get asked is, do I need to do it now? I get, particularly for SMEs, for startup companies, for small companies, intellectual property registration can be expensive, it can be lengthy. A lot of people want to know, do I have to do it now or can I do it later? You can do it later depending on the type of intellectual property, but what you've got to be careful of is invalidation. So for certain intellectual property rights, particularly patents and designs, you can invalidate your own registration by disclosure before you go down the route of protecting it. So you've got to be aware of the different types of intellectual property and how you might invalidate them. So if it is something you're considering putting off, I would advise you to talk to IP attorneys sooner than later and see what you can and can't put off. And don't go disclosing anything until you talk to an intellectual property advisor. So don't go to market, don't go releasing it to suppliers, don't put it on websites and things like that. Talk to an intellectual property advisor first to see where you can do it. Another question we get is about intellectual property and who owns it. Also very, very important when you're generating intellectual property within your business, you need to make sure your business owns it. Okay? You've got to make sure that employees that are there to generate intellectual property are transferring that into the business, that you're transferring it into the business owns the intellectual property, and that somebody can't walk off with it at some part of the day and claim ownership to it. So always think about things that are made and generated within your business. Are you maintaining the intellectual property within your business? And make sure that you put procedures in place to ensure that you are. Again, if you talk to an IP advisor, they'll advise you how. A lot of people also have a slight misconception of how intellectual property will generate you money. Intellectual property in itself is an exclusive right. It's a right to stop people doing things, but it won't make you money in itself. Having a design, having a patent, having a trademark registration won't make money itself. It allows you to stop other people from copying you, which gives you either market advantage, or you can transact it like any other piece of property, so you can license it out and let other people do the work for you. Okay? So the intellectual property itself won't make you money, but you will make money off transacting it. Hence, management of intellectual property is so important, that you have everything in place, you own it, and you've captured everything you can in your business so you can make money off it. So it'll give you an effective route and entry into the market. It'll also give you exclusive market share, which is quite important, particularly in this industry. It's not a license to do something, so don't think that because you have intellectual property you're allowed to do something. You may infringe on somebody else's intellectual property. So you also have to be aware of not only your own intellectual property, but third-party intellectual property. Think that other people may have something protected, and if you are going out into the market, your sales, your commercialization of a product or a service could end up infringing somebody else's intellectual property. So again, it's something to talk to an IP advisor early on to make sure that you don't invest a lot in a business idea that will essentially be stopped in its tracks. Also, just because it's a way of copying fakes and things like that, but it'll give you sustained market share. So intellectual property will always give you a long-term market share that will be sustainable, as opposed to fad things. So if you are in a short life cycle, high turnover business, it may not be the way forward for you. Registration might not be, but it will give you sustained market share, because even when you have entry to market, the exclusive right will stop people coming into the market after you. Alright, so that's very important as well. A lot of people, especially when you're not really au fait with it, think that there's a lot of stuff, and there is a lot of information to do with intellectual property. I ran through this very quickly today, but if you want more information, you can get information through, this is a booklet that we designed with Knowledge Transfer Ireland. They're the National Technology Transfer organisation, so they look after tech transfer for all the universities and small businesses in the country. And we work with them to devise this booklet on managing IP. So there's a lot of information in here about what is IP, how you generate it, how you capture it, and how you can exploit it. Luke down the back there has some paper copies of it, if you want to grab them on the way out. It's also available from the KTI website for download, and it's available from our F4 Kelly website for download. There's a lot of information in there. I would encourage you to read it, to understand intellectual property a bit better and how to manage it a bit better. And if in doubt, always contact an IP advisor before you do anything, just to make sure you don't end up on the wrong end of either a lawsuit or some bad intellectual property choices. There's a lot in there. If you have any specific questions, I can talk to you now. I'm also here for a while. I can hang around if anyone has specific questions that they want to ask about their business or anything like that. But I can take general questions now. But thanks very much for your time.